Ladies and gentlemen, I am blessed today because I have a very important leader from our community in our studio today in Bronx Net. So this is a good news for you guys because today we have a very special topic. Her name is Christelle Onu. She's a lead advisor for African community on human rights. And Christelle and her office have been dedicating their time for the African community to educate them, to inform them about their rights. Thank you for coming.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
I'm very happy to have you today, more than happy to have you today. Because when I went to your website, on your Facebook profile, and I read so much about you, and I said, I wish I knew you years ago, because you are so inspiring. So thank you again for coming here.
Thank you so much.
So we're gonna start. First, I want you to introduce yourself to our viewers. So you're gonna tell us a little bit about your work, yourself, your background.
Yeah, so thank you again very much, Karim, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Christelle Onwo. I am the African Communities Lead Advisor at the New York City Commission on Human Rights. I am also the Equal Employment Recruitment Strategist at the Commission. Essentially, what I do at the Commission is basically advocate for African communities throughout the 5 boroughs. So in Queens, Manhattan, Staten Island, Brooklyn, and the Bronx. And so I put together forums for the community based on the issues that are very dear and important to the community. In terms of being the Equal Employment Recruitment Strategist, I also represent the Commission at career fairs as well as job fairs. I also have other positions that I hold. So I'm an adjunct professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, where I teach gender-based violence. I am also a co-alumni. So I did a program through the New York Co-Leadership Center to basically work on my leadership skills. But most of my work has to do with galvanizing the African community, educating them about their rights, just so that they can be informed and know what to do in case if either face discrimination at work or discrimination in housing. It's also very important, for us to understand that the African community is definitely growing in the city of New York, and so having an office such as the Commission on Human Rights, that is fully dedicated to reaching out to that specific community is very important. And so being able to do this work at least has been very inspiring and powerful for me, and so I can use my platform to elevate the voices of the community.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. How many days you work a week? That's too much. You have a family. You got it's true what you're doing. We need you in this community.
Yeah.
The job you're doing is very important, but you have a family too, right?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so, all right, so thank you. So tell us a little bit, how do you reach out to the African community to inform them about this? Do you try and go to meet them at gathering places like churches, masjid? Where do you meet them? Because they don't have time to listen to radio, to watch TV. So where do you meet them? Even symposium, they don't show up.
Yeah, actually, that's a very excellent question. And when I first started doing this work about 2 years ago, right? So I would say that there are people who have done this work before me, and so I did not have as much experience working with African community. But prior to working at the Commission, I worked at South Chiato Center for African Women and Families, where I was a social worker supervisor. So through that work, I came in contact with a lot of the African women, African men who came through the door. And so having worked at South Chiato for about a year really helped me to get an idea of what the issues of the African communities were. And so when I started at the Commission, originally this position did not exist. It's a newly created position. And it came about after the presidential election. So our commissioner reached out and she said, does anyone else, in the office has any ideas of how to reach out to communities that have been underserved? And so I said, the African community. And so she asked me to put a proposal together. And the issue that you just raised, that Africans don't show up, right? So I was very worried when I was putting the forum together, which happened in 2017 here in the Bronx, and it happened at Metropolitan College of New York. And I was so amazed because we had about 100 people who showed up to this forum. And so the way I was able to organize the community was by going to churches, mosques, right? And then speaking with people one-on-one and introducing myself. I am, African myself, originally from Cameroon, and so that was, in a way, very helpful. And so having the social work background allowed me to meet people where they were. And so I went in there very humble and just, opened my arms and said, I'm just here to listen and to listen to what issues you have. And so just going there, with that mentality was
Let's talk about the issue you just mentioned. This is very important. We're talking about African people right. We're talking about discrimination.
Yeah.
How seriously African people are taking their right? We still consider ourselves like we're not American. Okay, anyway, this is not my country, so I don't care. They're always busy looking for money.
Yeah.
So how seriously they're taking their right?
You're right. And so I actually think that is not only applicable to the African community. I think that like most immigrant communities feel the same way. And so a lot of the work that I have been trying to do is just demystify, that myth and saying, yes, you're here, but you might have started a family. Even if you're building a house back home, who's living in that house, And so it is better for you to get involved here, right? Because your kids are going to have to go to the system. So you need to build, right, a network for them. And so changing that mentality and saying, like we need to stop saying, oh, I'm going to go back home because the people who've been here, they came for 1 year, they end up, going to like 30 years.
It takes the entire life, not to turn people life.
Yeah.
I mean, to turn people mentality. Okay, so tell me, what are the different ways African people are discriminated?
Okay, so at the Commission on Human Rights, so we basically focus on 3 different areas. So we have housing, so there can be discrimination that takes place in housing, employment, and then public accommodation, which can be a park, it can be a school, it can be a hospital, and then we have discriminatory harassment, which can be, someone walking down the street, and because of their perceived, let's say religion or actual or perceived religion, they are being targeted, or just bias-based profiling by law enforcement. But most of the time, we focus on housing, employment, and public accommodation. So people can be discriminated against based on their immigration status, based on their religion, based on their gender, or maybe because of the fact that they have children in the home, because of their credit history, because of their religion, right? And so we have at the Commission 25 protected classes. So we call them protected classes, which basically means that you can't face discrimination based on your national origin. So I am from Cameroon, right? And so I have an accent, right? So if I'm working in a place, I shouldn't have, to worry about not getting a promotion because of my accent, right?
How many African immigrants reached out to you to complain about discrimination cases?
Yeah, and so I don't have the actual number.
Did you have some people who called your office, right?
Yes, I do. I have, at the Commission, so we have a Community Relations Bureau, which is a bureau that I'm part of. So we're basically tasked with educating the community, organizing the community, putting programming and events together. But then we also have a Law Enforcement Bureau, which is mostly made up of attorneys. So they are the ones who do the investigation, and they're located downtown at our main office. And so if the community reaches out, the calls will go to our info line department. And so if the person who made the claim has a valid claim.
What is a valid claim?
So again, it's case-by-case basis, and so the lawyers have to look at the case entirely before making a decision. And so we have a process that we normally go to. So first, for you to file a claim of discrimination, the incident must have happened, within a year. So we have a 1-year statute of limitation, and it has to happen within New York City because that's our jurisdiction.
How can I know that I'm discriminated? How can I make a difference between the fact that I've been denied the house and discrimination?
So we also have at the Commission what we call testers. Right? So someone comes in and tells us, I face discrimination. We can send in testers, right? To go into that specific place, and basically figure out whether a discrimination did occur. And oftentimes the Commission can also initiate its own investigation, right, without having a complainant name on the complaint, so we can start our own investigation. in that case.
Because if I go in a restaurant and to order chicken wing, example, okay, I know I don't like chicken wing, okay, and a white dude comes in the same restaurant and order chicken wing, and is served before me, is that discrimination?
Again, case-by-case basis. I won't be able to say because, there might be other factors, right, that might have led to that. And so, again, it's case-by-case basis. And I would say it's better for you to reach out to our office, to speak with one of our InfoLine colleagues, to see if you have a claim. But then again, when you talk about discrimination, at least with New York City, which has one of the most comprehensive anti-discrimination law in the whole entire nation, right? It has to fall between the protected classes. That's what we call them, and then it's either has to be again housing, employment, or public accommodation, and then it's definitely a case-by-case basis.
One of the things you talked to me last time, you said hair legal.
Yes.
Can you explain what is hair legal?
So basically, the hair legal guidance. So the Commission, sometimes in February, issued a hair legal guidance, basically stating that people of African descent, right, who have natural hair, cannot face discrimination in employment, as well as public accommodation. Basically, let's say, for example, cut your hair, or not wear natural hair, right? Because the hair is part of you. And so you shouldn't have, to alter your hair to fit certain standards.
That's crazy. So let's talk a little bit about one of the issues African people meet here, the immigration status. Okay, the immigration status. So tell me a little bit about this. When someone who has a deportation case, example, and he has been assaulted. So what can this person do? Can you call police? Can you complain?
Essentially, so the New York City Human Rights Law states that you cannot face discrimination, right, based on your immigration status. And so what does that mean, right? If you're going to apply for housing, the landlord cannot ask you, what is your immigration status? Are you a U.S. citizen? Are you a permanent resident, right? They cannot ask you about your specific immigration status. If you are working in a place, right, they cannot threaten you, with calling ICE. They cannot threaten you with deportation. They cannot tell you not to speak your language at work. That is against, the New York City Human Rights Law. And if they do, right, we encourage people to call our office by either calling 311, saying human rights, or just calling our InfoLine number, which is 718-722-3131, 718-722-3131. And then someone in the office will be able to pick up the call and provide you with guidance. And we also speak about 35 languages at the Commission. And then in the case of employment as well, so the human rights law, we have what we call reasonable accommodation. So if you are working and you practice a certain faith, right, and you need to maybe pray 5 times a day, right, the employer cannot make an issue about that, right? The employer should provide you with a space for you to be able to pray.
So where should you complain?
At the Commission. You can call either 311 and say human rights, or you can call our InfoLine number, which is again 718-722-3131.
But again, do African people call your office? Do African people call 311 to complain, or 411?
So most Africans in New York City have reached out to me, right, for assistance in terms of discrimination, whether it be housing, discrimination in employment. And once they do, I try to figure out how to reach out to my colleagues at InfoLine, to basically report the complaint. So yes, every New Yorker has called the office. In terms of like actual numbers, statistics, I don't have them, but having done this work for about 2 years now, I know people have come to me, and I have been able to be of assistance. If you have an apartment, is the landlord telling you, or if you go and look for an apartment, is the landlord telling you, oh, I'm not going to take your Section 8 voucher, or I'm not going to take your FEPS voucher? That's against the law in New York City, right?
But this is the landlord policy. It doesn't take voucher.
That is discrimination. The landlord cannot say that. The landlord, the superintendent, the real estate agent, they cannot refuse vouchers. That is against the law in New York City.
Really?
Yes, it is. And also, so sometimes landlords will say, if you have, this is one of the complaints that I've received a lot for the African communities, that landlords oftentimes will say, if you have too many children in your apartment, they make too much noise, so I'm going to call the police. Okay. You can't do that, right? So just, by the mere fact that you have the presence of children in the home, landlord or superintendent cannot discriminate against you because of that.
your project, you have a symposium very soon, right?
Yes.
So tell me about it.
So every year, for the past now going to 3 years, we have been putting together an African annual forum. It's what it was originally called, to galvanize the African community, to mobilize them, you know, and also ensure that other government agencies are paying attention to the growing community. And so for the past 2 years, we had, you know, the first African forum, like I mentioned before, was at Metropolitan College of New York, and it was more about introducing government to the community. And at that forum, we had about 20 different agencies who came in to share services. Last year, we had the second annual African Forum, and it was more about representation. And so we were able to have a forum, a panel discussion where we reach out to Africans who are working in government so they can basically explain to their brothers and sisters, you know, how did they get into government, you know, and how can other Africans get into government. And so just ensure that we have the representation that we need. And then we had a mini career fair where agencies were able to share their job openings. And so this year, the theme is a little different. And so it's mostly about bridging the gap between, I would say, like, you know, like local, national / international. And so there's been a lot of interest from the international community to do work with the African diaspora. And sometimes, you know, African immigrants who are living in New York City tend to view, for example, you know, like the United Nations, you know, as something that is so far-fetched. And so the idea of this event, you know, is to bring in, you know, all these high-level officials to interact with the community, to hear from the community, you know.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. You have another one here again.
Yes. Let me just add, one more thing about this event.
Okay, please.
It's okay. And so we're also hoping to have a conversation about what does it mean to be a first-generation African immigrant, second-generation African immigrant, and how do we build coalition among ourselves, right? And so we have amazing two keynote speakers who are coming. So the Undersecretary General Special Advisor on Africa, Ms. Beans Gawana, she will be present, as well as the Deputy Mayor of Newark, which also Newark has a huge African community. And so we can learn from him about the best practices of what Newark has done to engage the community. And the second event that we're doing, if I have to show this, and so this is basically a continuation of a project that, you know, in a way, like I started back in March, you know, about, like, you know, organizing African women and showcasing them, and just like we can have a conversation about the issues that African women and girls are going through in New York City. And so how can we take those issues and turn them into concrete policy steps, and also share them with other city agencies.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, we have today Christelle Onwo. She's a lead advisor for African Community on Human Rights. You heard what she said, good advice, a lot of good message to you today. Thank you again for coming. No problem. Do you have one last word to our viewers?
So first of all, thank you so much again for having me. It's been a pleasure to be here and share information with the community. So I just wanted to let the community know, if you can, please come May 2nd, right? This will be a good opportunity for you to meet with our amazing guest speakers, and also please do stay engaged and stay involved. Thank you.
I'm very impressed, and thank you for the job you're doing for the community. I think, yes, from today we learn a lot from you, and I hope African people will reach out to you if they have a problem.
Thank you so much.
Again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
For you to know that we feel the pain. We feel the pain that you're feeling. We're all immigrants to this country, and we come here to try to make our lives better, to feed our families back home. One way or another, my fathers, my brothers, my sisters, we all come from Africa, and we know that you're humble people, and you're people that go out there to work hard to support your family. This is a very painful moment for our industry. It's a very painful moment because we saw a young man being savagely murdered.
Hi guys, thank you for coming again.
You're welcome.
We have a bad news in the community. 2 weeks ago, we lost one of the drivers. His name is Ganu. He has been killed in the Bronx. One message to the family of the victim.
We feel it because it could be any one of us. And the reason we feel it is because that's a mother who lost the one part of her that can care for her son. Ryan is his name, right? Latifah, she's amazing. She's still grappling with it, but you know, the community came together. Amazing response when we asked for help for the family. So.
And honestly, I saw the video of the funeral of the mosque. I did not see a lot of drivers. Do you think they are concerned about it?
They are very concerned. They are very concerned because even though a lot of drivers came, honestly, but maybe if you're thinking of the scale of 100 or 200,000 drivers to show up, probably that did not happen. But I can tell you for sure that it was on every driver's mind. And they reach out one way or another. And actually, we are seeing the actions, you know, of drivers reaching out, trying to do whatever they can to assist.
I believe when this kind of action happen, this kind of tragedy happen in the community to a driver, you know, we have to send out a strong message.
Yes.
Correct.
So the number matters,
Yes. Yes.
I believe. What do you think?
Well, the number mattered because we started on behalf of the family a GoFundMe page, Blessed by his wife. And when we did that, we weren't sure. We set a low standard. We put 5,000. Drivers they contributed over $35,000.
Wow.
So tell me drivers don't care.
Okay.
With that number alone, drivers gave 10, 15, 20. You know, they gave what they could and they gave it from their heart. And it shows that maybe they couldn't. And you know, the thing with drivers are still scratching the surface to survive. So taking time off, but they did their prayers in their various mosques.
I love your attitude. I love your answer. These are true leaders in our community. You definitely you deserve this, and you did this fundraiser, right? GoFundMe. Thanks to you, we have this amount. Thanks to the drivers too.
Yeah.
But what can we do next time to prevent this kind of things happening?
I mean, there is no price for safety. You know, we've been stressing safety for the longest at IDJ. For driver's safety, do whatever it takes to protect yourself because we are doing a very dangerous job. We are out at night, we are out with the public, and think about it. You are driving, somebody's sitting behind you. You can't see them, you know. So and we go sometime in certain areas that we don't know and trying to figure out how do we get out of there. Anything can happen. So all we tell drivers is, that's very simple. Invest in a camera, a very good dash cam. That costs next to nothing. From $40 up, you can have a dash cam. That might prevent a lot of crimes. Because if somebody is trying to do something to you, they approach, they see a dash cam running. We cannot prevent crime 100% anywhere in the world, but we do preventive measures. And part of those preventive measures is like get a dash cam. And we actually approach app-based companies to talk about panic buttons. And now there is Uber that, you know, implemented within the app, you know, where you can hit, 911 and have, you know, a 911 dispatcher get your call right away, and police track your vehicle, you know. So all those are stuff that that are right there available to drivers. But you got to create multiple layers of security to make sure you are secure.
How many times have we got a ping and it says G or P or Q? Who the heck is that? And we said this shows that you do not care about the safety of your driver by giving a driver a letter of some person who's coming. We don't know male, female, dog, cat, rat. Who's that? Who's Q? I mean, and they should do a semi-background check. Make sure that that person who's using the app you have sufficient information about them so that if something happens, we can be protected.
Partition between the riders and the drivers, like yellow cab. This can work too?
Yes, because if you think about it, like yellow cab, they had this partition voted into law in 1994. So, but up until 2016, that law is gone now. It's no longer existent because now a yellow cab is not required to have a partition. They can either have partition or a camera, you know, because their argument was Uber's app-based companies are taking business away from them because riders feel much more comfortable, you know, because there is no partition, so there is like a connection between rider and driver, and they felt like, you know, that was something needed even on the yellow cab side of the industry. So that's the reason why it was taken away. And, you know, added the fact that crime went down also, you know, for the past few years, and they felt like, you know, it's okay to take it out. But I think that worked. That protect a lot of yellow cab drivers. Years been helped a lot by the partition because that brought a lot of safety to them.
After all those crimes, what action TSC is taking?
Ladies first.
Well, right now you have the panic button be an issue, but not on an actual button, but be on the phone for the drivers. The concern is that it be activated when there really isn't something. And what the police department is feeling that they may be dispatched for things that's not urgent when they could have really been helping a crime. So to make sure that is spot on, that's where the time comes in. That's where they need to work with the app companies to make sure that it's safe on both sides. So when it does happen and they do have to, it's not difficult for the driver to get to that panic button. The thing is to think, you know, when you're in that situation, your mind don't work the same. So you may not remember all these things, but if it's in a way that is easy, you might just be able to press it. We're advocating that they take away the ban on cell phone for drivers because that will help drivers be protected more. Having an earpiece, they can activate an emergency call in a heartbeat just by a touch, right? And because they took that away and gave drivers 5 points if they get caught, that's telling the driver, we don't care about your safety.
Thank you.
But you let an average driver who's not a professional be on the phone like this, you know, talking through that, do everything that they do, but a professional driver can't. That makes absolutely no sense.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you for coming. One last message to send to viewers?
The last
drivers?
message is the same message every single day. Be safe out there. Come join IDG.
Yes.
And you?
I agree. We need you because with numbers, you get action. And we need numbers, we need support when we have rallies, when we have campaigns, when we have petitions that we want drivers to sign up without us running behind them. We want them to keep. We have Facebook. They can see everything that we're doing. Come and tell us. We appreciate what you're doing. Come, join us. Ask us what we can do. Talk to your fellow drivers when you see them on the road. See, when you get a problem solved by IDG, make sure you tell your friend, hey, they helped me with this.
Thank you. My last message, thank you guys for coming.
You're welcome.
And support Africa on the Move. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Good night.
Good night.